Hello, good morning. So in this video, I'm going to talk about this philosophical problem called the problem of other minds. Now, in order to get clear about the problem of other minds, it is useful to relate it to the things that we have been talking about a couple of weeks before. Now, you might remember that a couple of weeks before, we looked at Descartes' arguments in the Meditations 1 and 2. He came to the conclusion that I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I exist. And the way he came to this argument, the way he came to this conclusion was by arguing that even if I'm dreaming, even if I'm being deceived by an evil demon or evil genius, it still remains true that I am dreaming, that I am the one who's being deceived by the evil demon, and if I'm dreaming and if I'm being deceived, therefore I have to exist no matter what. But let's pick up from this point. So I think, therefore I am. But this argument only establishes that I exist as a mind. It only establishes that one mind, that is my mind, exists. It does not say anything about other minds. It does not say anything about other people insofar as there are other minds. So this argument cannot establish the existence of other minds or other people. So this raises a philosophical problem, which is how do we know that other minds or other people exist? I mean, I walk around every day, in my daily activities. I drive, I go to school, and whatever. I seem to encounter other people, but given that I cannot see or observe their minds, how do I know that these people are not just cleverly constructed robots who are just who are just going around, going through the motions, or for that matter, how do I know that they are not very sophisticated zombies that look like people on the outside, but that actually have no minds? So the problem of other minds, very simply, is that there does not seem to be any way of proving and knowing that any other minds other than my own exist. The problem is actually quite, it's actually quite complicated. And one of the readings that I've assigned for this week is a paper by Frank Jackson and Alex Hyslop. It's called The Analogical Inference to Other Minds. Now, this paper actually does a very good job of summarizing the problem of other minds very clearly, and also giving a couple of possible solutions to this problem. So please have a look at this paper. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the issues that are raised in this paper, though not all, and hopefully by doing so, I'll be able to give you a good introduction and a good primer to the problem of other minds in general and to what's going on in this paper in particular. So let me start with with how ordinary people usually go about trying to prove the existence of other minds. I mean, before you took philosophy, you probably took it to be a piece of common sense knowledge that other minds do exist other than your own. But how do you go about proving that? So most people in their everyday lives, they usually try to prove the existence of other minds by some kind of argument by analogy. Very simply, the argument by analogy says something like this. Look, this is a mind. And it controls a body. So this is a body that's controlled by a mind. And I see other bodies that are moving around and behaving in ways that are similar to my body. So it seems to follow that these other bodies must be controlled by other minds. Therefore, other minds exist. All right. So more formally, the argument that I just ran by you can be represented in this way. So it has four premises. First premise is that I have a body that behaves in a certain way, and that's pretty clear by observation. And secondly, this behavior is caused by a mind, which is my own, which is also a pretty obvious thing, because we can observe. I can observe that there is a mind here. I have a mind. I experience it. Now, of course, there is a bit of a question as to whether all my body's behaviors are caused by my mind, But let's set aside this problem for now. Let's just assume that it is unproblematic, that my behavior is indeed caused by my mind. So, okay, so we have a body, number one, I have a body that behaves in a certain way, and this behavior is caused by my mind, so therefore my mind exists. Now, number three, I also observe that there is another body over there that behaves in a similar way to mine. Therefore, I conclude that this behavior is caused by another mind. And, well, there is actually a fifth premise, which is that therefore there is at least one other mind, and probably a few others and many others that exist as well. Therefore, other minds exist. Therefore, there are other minds. Alright, so it's a fairly straightforward argument, very commonsensical argument by analogy for other minds. Again, to repeat myself, basically it's saying that, you know, I have a body that's controlled by a mind, and there's another body over there is behaving in a similar way as mine, so therefore it is also controlled by another mind. Okay, so in their paper, Jackson and Hyslop actually raised a couple of problems with this commonsensical argument. More specifically, they raised two objections to this argument by analogy. AA here stands for argument by analogy. So the two objections are as follows. They are the A-type objections and the B-type objections. Okay, so the A-type objection basically says, look, you are allowed to make a conclusion that your own mind exists because you can observe and experience your own mind, but you can never observe and experience another mind, for very obvious reasons. You can observe another body, but you cannot observe the mind that is supposedly animating the body. So if you cannot observe another mind, how can you make any conclusions about it? I mean, the idea is that, you know, in order to be scientifically sound, observations we must be able, the conclusions we make in our arguments must be based on things that we can observe. And if you cannot observe something, how can you say that it exists? Okay, so that's the type A type objection. There is also this thing called a B type objections, which is that you know, I can only observe one mind, and how can I make any conclusions about the existence of other minds based on this one observation? After all, I'm trying to say that many other minds exist based on just one observation, which is the observation of my own mind. So, or to put it in scientific terms, my sample size is only one. If you have taken any science or biology or psychology classes, you will know that trying to come up with an argument, trying to make a conclusion about the world based on a sample size of only one is, it makes for a very weak argument. So the B-type objection simply says the argument by analogy is not a good argument because its sample size is too small. It is based on a sample size of only one mind, my own. So in today's video, I'm only going to talk about I'm only going to discuss the A-type objection in more detail. I'm not going to talk too much about the B-type objections. It's not because the B-type objection is not interesting, but it's because I want to keep this video short. So, but please take some time to read the rest of the paper and figure out what replies are possible to the B-type objections. So for now, in what follows, I'm just going to talk about a possible reply to the A-type objection. Okay, so remember that the A-type objection simply says that the argument by analogy for other minds is not a good argument because you cannot observe other minds. How can you make a conclusion about something that you cannot observe? Okay, so what is the reply to this objection? In their paper, Jackson and Hyslop bring up this example of helium on the sun, and they use it as a reply to the A-type objection. Now, actually, okay, so how do they use this as a reply to the A-type objection? Okay, so first we start by thinking about helium on the sun. How do we know that there's helium on the sun? I mean, we have never been to the sun. Nobody has ever been to the sun to observe the helium that's actually there. So how do you know that there's helium on the sun? Well, we know that there's helium on the sun because of the light rays that come from the sun. Because we know that helium, as like any other element, has a particular spectrum. So the light rays that come to us from the sun also have that same spectrum as helium. So based on that, we can very fairly and reasonably conclude that there is helium on the sun, even though nobody has ever been to the sun to observe the helium that's on the sun. Alright, so how does this apply to the problem of other minds? So this is how it applies. Hyslop and Jackson can say this. They can say, look, this is kind of similar to the problem of other minds, because if we can say that there is helium on the sun, even though we have never actually been to the sun to observe the helium that's there, surely we can also say that there are other minds, even though we have never actually seen or observed another person's mind. I mean, just as we can use indirect evidence to conclude that there is helium on the sun, we can also use indirect evidence of a certain body's behavior to conclude that there is a mind that is animating that body, and that therefore there are other minds. So the helium objection is used very cleverly by Jackson and Hyslop to try to show us that we don't have to be able to observe something to conclude that it exists. Just as we don't have to conclude that there is, just as we don't have to be able to observe helium on the sun directly to say that there is helium on the sun, we also do not need to observe a mind directly to say that, to be able to say that there is a mind that's animating that body and many other bodies. So therefore, according to this argument, example of helium on the sun, the argument by analogy is not a bad argument, because we can make analogical conclusions about other minds without having to observe them, without ever having observed them. Okay, so far so good. So it looks like Jackson and Hyslop have successfully defended the argument by analogy for other minds against A-type objections. Okay, but are they really successful? That's the question. Would this example of helium on the sun, would it succeed in convincing people who are skeptical of the argument by analogy? Well, let's think about this. So here's what I think somebody might say if he's skeptical of the argument by analogy. They might say that there is a difference between the example of helium on the sun and the example of other minds. And here's the difference. The difference is that the impossibility of going to the sun to observe the helium there is actually only a physical impossibility. I mean, right now we are unable to go to the sun to observe the helium because A, we don't have spaceships that can travel that far, and B, we don't have spaceships that can withstand the heat of the sun. But it is possible that one day, maybe in the distant future, we'll be able to build spaceships that can both travel fast enough and that are strong enough to withstand the heat of the sun. I'm guessing you will need like superheat shields or something. When we can do that, then we will be able to actually go to the sun and directly observe the helium there, right? But with but other minds is a different matter altogether. There is no way we can ever build a spaceship or build anything that will allow us to observe another mind. Why? Because a mind is not a physical thing, and therefore a mind is not something that is in physical space. A mind is nowhere in the universe. So whereas all observations are by nature physical. To observe is always to observe something physical. So the person who is skeptical of the argument by analogy would say that the example of helium on the sun is not a very good example, because there are actually two different examples. The helium example involves a physical impossibility which can be overcome by technology and engineering and all that, whereas the other mind's example actually involves a logical impossibility. It is logically impossible for us to observe another mind. So therefore, the problem of other minds, the example of other minds, is not just a physical impossibility that can be overcome with technology or engineering. It is a logical impossibility. It is impossible to observe another mind. So my view is that somebody might use this difference between a physical and a logical impossibility to say that the argument of helium on the sun is not a very good argument to defend the argument by analogy. Okay, so I will leave it at this. I want you to think about this on your own and make up your own mind. No pun intended. Make up your own mind as to whether you think that the argument of helium on the sun is a good response to the A-type objection against the argument by analogy. So yeah, take some time to think about it and have fun. Thank you.